So, hi everyone. So we're back for our next talk of the day. This talk will be given by Helene van Soest, and Helene is researcher international climate policy at PBL, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, or in Dutch it's Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving. Again, we will have a talk, and then afterwards we will have some time for questions. So if you have questions, you can leave them in the chat box, and then we'll discuss it later on. So enjoy.
Right, so I assume you see my screen?
Yes, everything's perfectly clear. Thank you.
Any trouble? Okay, thanks for inviting me. My name is Helene, as Laura already indicated, and I will speak a bit about my work at PBL. Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency is the full name in English, and just PBL in Dutch. And I called my presentation Mind the Gap, which could relate to working at the science policy interface, but also some of the content, which you'll soon see. So just a bit of background about myself. I studied in Wageningen, first a Bachelor in Environmental Sciences with a major in Environmental Quality and Systems Analysis, and then a minor in Climate Change to figure out if that's a topic I want to continue in. I did, so I chose the Master Climate Studies. There I did a major Earth System Science, so a bit of a natural science focus, you could say. And I didn't do an internship, but in the second year of my master, I followed this honors program in which I was supposed to write a PhD proposal, along with just working on my master's thesis, of course. I'll get to that. Of course, also did some other activities on the side, like study association, education committee, always nice for your CV. Graduated and didn't get the PhD proposal funded, which I now say is a good thing, because I don't think I would have been very happy totally focusing on a PhD. So I needed to figure out what I wanted to do, and I had no clue basically what I could do outside university, because I also didn't do an internship to see what's the possibilities. So I went looking for a job, but also already got an offer from someone who was actually looking for an intern. Couldn't do that because I wasn't affiliated with university. So they told me, just become a freelancer and you can send us a bill. So I did. I was a freelance researcher and consultant, independent, for a year or so. And in the meantime, while working on nice topics to build up my CV and independence, I also went further looking for actual jobs, you could say. Because I also missed having colleagues and also learning from tools that bigger companies might have. And maybe later I won't miss colleagues and return back to this, but for now it's actually nice to be in a bit bigger institutional environment. So I was also meeting potential employers informally to just figure out what working there would entail and what I would like. My first real job interview was for the government traineeship program, which I didn't get, but was a really good preparation for any other job interview you get afterwards, because it's a full-fledged assessment, IQ test, etc. Then at some point I just applied to PBL, formal route, because it's part of government. So I just went to the vacancy on the website and applied formally. I was invited for an interview, but didn't get the job at first. But they called me half a year later or so to ask if I was still looking for a job, because I needed someone to replace someone that was actually leaving for a couple of months. So I did, and they extended my contract a couple of times, and I'm still here. I see some questions coming in the chat. We'll come back to that in the end. That's the advantage of having two screens. So PBL then, that's the National Knowledge Institute for Strategic Policy Analyses on Environment, Nature, Spatial Planning and Energy. Should actually know this by heart right now. This is the official description. And it is an independent research institute. And that means organization-wise or bureaucratically, it's part of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water. So I get my salary from the Dutch government. But there's a law actually regulating our independence as a scientific research institute. and it's located in The Hague, normally that is, now mostly at home, in a building called B30, we zijn nou 30, that's just the address, and it's there together with the other two planbureaus or assessment agencies of the Netherlands, which are CPB, I guess it's the most well-known, it's the Economic Planbureau, Centraal Planbureau, and then there's the one for Sociocultural Analyses, SCP. So that's 3 of us all in the same building, and there's 2 other institutes in that building as well. And PBL is the biggest of those 3 agencies. It has 7 content-related departments, over 200 employees, FTE, and quite a bunch of that have temporary contracts, like me until recently. And its mission and core tasks are summed up here. It really aims to improve the quality of decision making. So not so much the quality of the environment, but the quality of decision making related to the environment. And it does so always with an integrated approach. Really, policy relevance is key in all our work. And we do not only answer questions by the government, but also give unsolicited advice by, for example, detecting trends in the environment, but mostly evaluating possible policy options. And we work on 4 broad themes, being climate and energy, that's where I'm in, food, agriculture, nature, green and circular economy, and resilient urban regions. And then you could say we do that in various ways. At the base of that would be monitoring trends in environmental indicators, keeping up databases, etc. But actually, I would say most of the work focuses on the upper parts of this pyramid, being integrated assessments and outlook studies. And then the departments within PBL are organized like this, and I'm in the upper one, say it's the most important one, at least it's the biggest one, climate, air and energy. And what I do there, what might be interesting to give you a bit of a more concrete idea what working at PBL entails, is working in the climate, air and energy department, where you could say we have sort of 2 sub-departments, not officially, but in practice that is the case. PBL gets most of its money actually from government, 70% is funded in that way, but we can get some money also from, they call it entrepreneurship or so, for example, by applying for tenders that the European Commission puts out. And I'm in that little bubble because that means we work on international projects. And that has a good reason, of course, because climate knows no boundaries, even though most of the PBL work is focused on answering questions about the Dutch environmental and climate policy. Of course, we need also to look abroad. So in our department, we basically have people working directly for the Dutch government, evaluating the Dutch energy and climate agreements. And then we have this group where I'm in, looking more in the international climate policy sphere and directly working for the European Commission, mostly, on a couple of projects. And consultants would say that's not so many projects, but these are longer term projects. So they run for 2 to 4 years generally, and quite big research projects with international consortia. So we have partners across the world. And that work entails doing research, so it could be literature research, but also working with models and their scenarios. I'm not a modeler, I just use their results to put it into further analysis and try to translate that to policy. Data analysis is a big part of that, visualization as well, and putting it in various forms of presentation, reports, papers, policy briefs. And with papers, I mean also scientific papers. So actually, I'm also working on a PhD on the go because we are publishing in scientific journals, and in the end, I'll try to make that into one book that earns me a PhD. But it also means going to climate negotiations under the UNFCCC, for example, and presenting work to policymakers there or negotiators. And then there's a nice part of project meetings with our partners abroad to see where we are with the current work, what are we going to do, how are we going to contribute to the IPCC, process, etc. And these are then the projects that I'm working on. So if these three are a bit related, CD Links is already ended. It was more about the links between climate policy and sustainable development goals. Now we have Commit. It's a nice one because I'm joint project manager there. And it focuses much more on the modeling of mitigation pathways for 11 countries. I'll tell you a bit more about that one later. And then Engage has started recently, and it's more about the feasibility of climate pathways or decarbonization pathways. There's another project that I work on which is a bit different from these three because it is directly advising DG Climate Action of the European Commission on any questions they may have relevant for the negotiations that are ongoing. So it could be, tell us what does this whole term of climate neutrality mean? But it also entails every year making a report of where we stand with current climate policies. So we're tracking whether countries are actually on the right path to achieving their pledged contributions to the Paris Agreement. And I wanted to briefly show you what this project, one of those projects is all about. It's Commit. And it's basically a response to the Paris Agreement, which aims, as you probably know, to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius with respect to pre-industrial levels, and if possible, even 1.5. We're now at 1, so that's a challenge. On the other hand, though, to implement that, we have this sort of bottom-up process where countries can determine how they will contribute to those global goals. It's the nationally determined contributions. And to achieve those targets, they will have to implement national policies. And because the individual contributions may not add up to the global goals, countries already foresee that they needed a sort of global stocktake process to periodically review if we're still on track to meet those global targets. And you could say that that process requires really good scientific input and fair evaluation of all those individual country contributions. And it also requires a sort of common story between different scientists and different institutes. It would be hard for policymakers to understand what they need to do if everybody says something different. So what we try to do in Commit is come up with this shared understanding of what's needed to achieve those global goals and translate that to the national level, and also build up capacity in developing countries to do modeling, scenario analyses, to better support their national policymakers. And we have some partners around the world. Where's the mouse? Okay. In 11 countries, we have teams that simulate their energy and land use systems and the resulting emissions. And we have some partners in the EU, similar to PBL in many ways, with global models to capture the global conditions. And we have some products actually already coming out. I'm still working on some new scenarios, like a policy brief as input to the climate negotiations, and national fact sheets of how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit or transition to a low carbon system. I thought it might also be nice to show you a bit what working at PBL looks like. I took a screenshot of my calendar. It's a bit older, but still quite representative of what my work week usually looks like. It's a bit different now that people are working from home, because before people used to go to university on Monday. We have many people that have affiliations with Utrecht University and then sit there on Monday or Wednesday, for example. So Monday meant I can just focus and work on reports and papers, for example. Tuesday, normally full of meetings. Wednesday is awfully quiet, so I can just focus on really writing reports and policy briefs, etc. Thursday, quiet meeting day. Let's see how that changes if we get back to The Hague after the Corona lockdown. And Friday is also full of meetings, but that's because our department is the biggest, and we said we'll fill the building on Friday to spread the load a bit. Then in practice, I am answering emails, both internally and to external partners. I'm doing visualization, in this case in R. I'm tracking policies in G20 countries. We'll tell you a bit more about that. But also going to meetings. Could be project meetings to discuss ongoing work. But also the Paris Agreement in 2015 was really nice to present our work there. And then you hope that some policymakers are in the room and listening to the science. So a little bit of the content, because I work on different things, but this always comes back in all those projects basically. It's assessing progress of countries in achieving their nationally determined contributions, their pledged emission reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. So we try to see, are they actually meeting those pledges by collecting information in a database. We try to find the policies that have most impact on greenhouse gas emission reduction, and try to have a sort of definition of that, like its current policy, if it's legally adopted by the government, or if it's just a sort of overarching strategy. We only consider it if there's also supporting policy instruments behind that. We review that collection, top 10, 20 policies with country representatives to see if we covered the most important ones and if there are actual barriers to implementation that we should consider. And then publish this in this online database, which is actually sort of wiki form, so it's an open platform that people can contribute to. Then we try to put them into our model, and this is the model that we have at PBL. It's called the image model, and it's an integrated assessment model, and there are a couple of those around the world. And it basically describes interactions between humans and their environment, and it goes from driving forces like population growth and economic development to quite detailed representation of the energy system, so built up of energy demand in sectors such as transport, buildings, industry, but also energy supply sector. There's a description of agriculture and land use, and of those systems, the resulting emissions, and then their impact on the environment again. And we can include the effect of policy measures. Sometimes directly, we can just change some parameters and variables in the model to represent the effects of certain policies and targets. So let's say renewable targets for India of 40 gigawatts solar or wind, I don't know by heart. We can just put that in the model, and in some cases we have to make a bit of a translation to reflect the effects of policies. And on the right side there's a more elaborate scheme of all the interlinkages. It's quite a complicated model. And if we do that, we get pictures like this. These are the scenario projections, and it shows greenhouse gas emissions, in this case in the EU. Historical emissions are the black line, and then the blue range shows the expected emissions in a scenario where we account for all currently implemented policies. Listed on the right are the most important ones. And we compare that to the target that the EU has set for itself under the Paris Agreement, a 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions relative to 1990 levels. And we see that actually the EU is on track to meet that target. But we do that also for other countries, at least for some 25 countries that we assess in this yearly report. We see that half of them now are still not on track to meet their self-determined targets. And blue are the ones that are on track, and orange brownish are not on track yet. I should say here that if a country is on track, does not mean that it's better or more ambitious than another country, because sometimes these targets are self-determined. And actually I'm getting to that here. We just published a paper in Nature Communications on this as well, seeing that sometimes countries reach their target, but they have not pledged a very ambitious target, or they don't reach it, but their target was quite ambitious to begin with. And this is sort of the global picture. What you see then is greenhouse gas emissions until 2030 under various scenarios. The upper one is if we account for the currently implemented policies. emissions are still projected to keep increasing. If you consider all the pledged contributions to the Paris Agreement, the orange line, emissions globally are expected to stabilize more or less. And then blue and green are what's needed according to 2 and 1.5 degree scenarios. And that's a steep decline in emissions. So here we basically see those gaps that I mentioned in the beginning, not only between what's pledged and what's needed according to 2 and 1.5 degree pathways, you could call that the ambition gap, but also between current policies and NDCs, and you could call that the implementation gap. So that's until 2030. On the longer term, we also, the scenarios also show what's needed to limit global warming to 2 or even 1.5 degrees, showing we need to peak emissions now. Well, I'm not sure if that's happening with Corona, it might be a temporary effect. Steep emission reduction thereafter, including decarbonization of the power sector, phasing out coal, etc., going to net zero emissions somewhere in the second half of the century, and then maybe even at negative emissions thereafter to compensate. That's on a global level, and then we also make these kind of pictures at a national level to see that there's many different ways countries can get to net zero. So for example, in India, there's a larger expected contribution from decarbonization, the energy supply system. On the EU, for example, transport has much more potential to contribute to emission reductions. And on the right are graphs that show some high-level indicators like carbon intensity of the economy being reduced quite drastically in such low carbon scenarios, but also share of renewables that is projected to increase quite rapidly. So that's the content. Of course, I do also some fun stuff on the side, like PBL Young, because we have quite a few young and often temporary employees. We have monthly drinks, although now it's a bit more quiet, of course. We'll do that once we are allowed to go back together. But also things like beach volleyball tournaments, workshops, and I'm working on trying to improve the HR policy situation, especially for young people with temporary contracts. And then, of course, I also organize stuff like lunch lectures to make sure that you know what your colleagues are actually working on, and things like a day out with the department or the entire PBL. So there's not just the content, there's also quite some fun. And I wanted to close with the VVM, because I think that's how you found me for this presentation, before we go to the questions. So VVM, Network of Environmental Professionals, and it organizes a lot of nice activities in many different fields. So you could actually either just deepen your knowledge on a theme that you're interested in, or broaden your horizon, because there's so many different themes being covered. It's a network of people working or studying environmentally related topics. And there's also a section Young to bring in young professionals into this network. And we have quite some ambassadors representing VVM. And this is a snapshot of the upcoming activities, mostly being transformed to webinars and other digital forms now. But often we would have discussion evenings, excursions, conferences, but also regular newsletters, for example. I guess that's what I wanted to say for now, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Maybe I'll take this off because it's driving us mad.
Well, thank you so much, Helene. We indeed have a bunch of questions, so let's just dive into them. You started you said you started as a freelancer, and the question is, how did you find clients as a freelancer?
Yeah, good one. I wouldn't have done that if my parents didn't already have a company of their own. And my father's actually working in a similar field, so that made it a bit easier to have some connections. He sometimes even had assignments for me, but also some connections to get started. And yeah, I already had an assignment to start with. That's why I became freelancer for the first 3 months or so. And then you just start rolling. Once you get 1 or 2 assignments, you get to know a bit more people. But it helps to to have a father in the same field. And otherwise, I may not have done that. I'm a bit risk averse. So having that as support, and also in terms of administrative support of how do you make a bill and how do you deal with taxes, that helps, of course.
Yeah. And for the ones that don't know already, people who are in this network, is VVM then a solution to get to know more people and
yeah, definitely. That's what it's for. It's a network, and there's actually quite a few. There's already many people now that are a freelancer. It's, of course, when I started, it may have not been as big as it is now, so it's also probably a bit easier now. There's so many resources for freelancers, and there's a really big group within VVM as well. And I think we're also thinking about organizing activities for them to help each other in that respect. Because then you could think of a pool of people, and then if they have assignments coming in, can refer to each other. So yeah, that's definitely an option. And of course, use these kind of events to start building up your network, and maybe I can reach out to some people. That's how it starts going.
Yeah, is VVM also accessible for internationals or only Dutch?
Yeah, that's one of those things I'm also working on, to get more and more in English, because the main language is Dutch, but we're transitioning towards more English, and especially events like on climate change will more easily be in English, because it is an international topic. So not everything is easily in English yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Okay, then a question about PBL. Do they offer short-term internships?
Yes, we only offer internships if you write a thesis, so not an internship per se. I think that changed a couple of years ago. And we have an internship coordinator who has an overview of available topics and spaces, and when you could come, and who could be your supervisor, etc. You could of course also come up with your own topic, and then we'll just see if that's relevant to us. But yeah, sure, there's quite a few interns all the time at PBL, and it could be a couple of months, could be half a year, depending on your requirements, actually. So we're flexible in that. It seems to be frozen. Did you get the latest?
Yeah, you're back again.
Okay, good.
Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so about the short-term internships.
Did you get some of the response or not at all?
No, you already quickly froze.
Okay. Then yes, the short answer is yes. Only if you do a thesis, so not just an internship. And the duration, we're flexible, depends on your requirements from your university. But we have an internship coordinator who can tell you if there's place, what topics are available, or you can bring in your own topic, and then we'll have to see if that's relevant to us. But for sure, we often have many interns in the building or at home now.
Okay, cool. And does PBL also hire people with a social environmental science background?
Yes. So of course my talk is a bit biased because it's what I do, and I have a more natural science background. And within my group, I guess that's more common, but also within other departments, but also within our team, we actually welcome that diversity, especially integrated assessment modeling hinges upon having different disciplines. So that's very helpful to have that.
Okay. Then again, about like the ability to speak Dutch. So is it feasible for non-Dutch speakers to work at PBL?
Yes, in not everywhere, because PBL is primarily for the Dutch government. But as you see, my department is also quite heavily focusing on the international side. All the work I do, I write and communicate in English. Only internally, maybe over the lunch, if there's only Dutch colleagues at the table, I would speak Dutch. But we have quite a few non-native speakers. And if you are really hired by PBL for a bit longer term, they will probably ask you to start learning Dutch, but it's not a requirement to be able to do your work, at least if you're working on these international projects. But there might be projects where you're supposed to write reports in Dutch, and then it can be helpful. So it depends a bit on the position, but it's not ruled out for sure, because we get that more and more, and especially on these international projects. And all our colleagues easily switch to English in conversation. Just some of the sort of emails from the director would be in Dutch, but then you always have Google Translate, so
Yeah.
It's doable.
Okay, great. And are there traineeships or jobs for starters? And is there a deadline, if so, for applying?
Traineeships, not specifically. Then you would have to go to the government-wide traineeship program, and then you could end up at PBL because you do a half-a-year assignment at different places, and PBL could be one of those. So then we are sort of part of that overall government traineeship program, Rijkstrainee programma. But then, the other side of that would be internship. And then for starters, yes, I mean, you can look at the vacancies coming up. Sometimes they're for more senior people, but often actually they're for people that recently graduated, for example. So depends on the position, but many positions that are available to people just starting, and you just learn on the job.
Great. And where can they find the vacancies? Yeah,
so we have that a page on our own website, but they will also always be posted on Werken voor Nederland. It's a website, and it has all government vacancies, and you can, I think, even set alerts if there's a new vacancy within certain criteria. That's probably the best way to go, because in the end you would have to apply in that way anyway. That's just the way it goes bureaucratically.
Yeah. Someone asking, Werken voor Nederland. Yes. Great.
I think it's somewhere in our presentation, but it would be good to,
Then is PBL also open to recruiting international graduates from Dutch universities for jobs?
Yeah, I think that's similar to the question before. I mean, there might be something like work visas or so, but we help, we support that. It's an option.
Yeah. This is a bit broader question. Which kind of backgrounds can you which kind of backgrounds is PBL looking for?
In terms of the study, you mean, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite diverse, because we, in one of the first slides, I said, have this integrated approach. So be able to do that, you need all kind of backgrounds. So it could be technical, we have mathematicians, economists, social scientists, actually always a mix, and we try to make teams that are mixed in that sense. Depends a bit on the department. I only talked about the climate, air and energy department, of course. It can be different for others, and then the project that you're working on, what's needed. But in general, all of those are fit. So I studied climate studies, which was quite focused on sort of understanding the climate system, or how the Earth system works. And it's not directly relevant to researching climate policy or even applying an integrated assessment model. It's a bit different, but that you just learn on the job, actually. Many people in our team that work on the model have done something like energy science or so in Utrecht, for example. But that's only one part of the PBL population. And there's also a need for people that are a bit more, that are not specialists, but generalists like me, for example. I never wanted to specialize. I always kept it a bit broad. And that's now quite useful as well.
Yeah. Okay. We also have a new question. Can you send an open application, or can you only apply for vacancies published by PBL?
Officially, only vacancies. I mean, you can send an open application. I think it has happened, and it can be nice because at least you're on the radar then, because you are actively approaching us, and people that ultimately might decide about hiring you say, there's something that someone who really wants this and has thought about this, and we keep him or her in mind if a new vacancy comes up, and then if you officially apply again, that would certainly help. But it's not like we're simply hiring people because they're sending an opening application. We don't have the budget or available FTEs for that. That's also regulated by the ministry, so we're a bit limited there. We can basically only hire new people if there's a new project and we need someone for that, or if someone leaves, for example. So in that sense, it's a bit difficult, but an internship is also a nice way to maybe get in, because then we can already see what you do, and we will think about you if there's a new opening.
Great. Then a question, are there opportunities for career growth within PBL?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, because it was also in the preparatory questions in your email. This is a bit difficult, I must be honest. It depends on what you consider growth, of course. If it's just salary, it's one thing, but I would prefer to consider it more in terms of responsibilities and different functions. So I'm now, for example, joint project manager, and I just started out as sort of a project researcher employee. I don't use the official terms. I would not call myself junior, just a researcher like anybody else. And I'm slowly now growing towards like project manager, project leader, I hope. But it's not straightforward, and we're working on it. I'm pushing a bit in terms of HR policy and to create more room for that. But because we have a sort of cap on how many people there are allowed with fixed contracts, etc. It's a bit dependent on what other people do now. If they start taking up other responsibilities, that would give more room for younger people to grow. So it's in development. We're now, for example, working on possible career paths, so spelling out what kind of lines you could follow in your career, like being totally focused as a researcher, or being a project leader, or being a methodologist, or being, well, there's a couple of those paths that we are defining and trying to fill in with appropriate courses and steps you could take. But this is in progress. So for sure now, if you would start, it's a nice place to build up your CV for a couple of years. But if you want to stay and then grow, maybe in a couple of years the situation will have improved. But it's now really work in progress, to be honest. And that's the only thing that I'm a bit more critical of at PBL now, because PBL is a really nice place to be. For me, it's a perfect combination of science and policy and being somewhere in between. So not focusing totally on the science, not being totally into the bureaucracy of maybe more government or ministry jobs, but somewhere in between there, and also not being a consultant that has to write down every minute to make a very specific bill. So you're quite flexible. You can work on really interesting topics and have an interesting position. It has become more and more important as well, as we're being asked about climate agreement and all those things. So that's just great, and really nice colleagues in that sense. It's a really nice place to work.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your transparency and your honesty about that. Then also, is working experience required?
That again then depends on the open vacancy. Often it's preferred, of course, but not a requirement, and sometimes it's hard to find someone. So we would always encourage you to apply, because even if the text says experience required, we may not be able to find someone, and we'll look into less experienced candidates. You could even, if you have done extracurricular activities, or even group work or assignments for climate within your study, list that, and that's and list how that's relevant. That might already help in proving some experience.
Yeah, because what extra curricular activities do you think are relevant if you want to apply?
I could even say playing volleyball is relevant because you learn to work in a team. Those kind of things. Yeah, I mean, but also being in some sort of network or voluntary group or teaching somewhere. I don't know. There's many things that might be interesting and stand out in a way. And if you have a story that how this helps being a nice employee, that will certainly help. But it could be quite broad, like being in the board of a study or student association, I think is very useful experience. But that depends on what you're supposed to do, of course. Maybe you build data visualizations on your free time and you're applying for a vacancy with that requirement, and that would be very helpful to have, or maybe an online course in Python or coding or whatever. It could all be very helpful.
Great. There's a question if it is possible to see your contact information, the slide again.
Yes, do you still see it?
Great. Yes, amazing.
Yeah, I also listed the Twitter accounts that I manage, not just my own, but also some for the projects. Depends on how much time I have, whether there will be much tweeting. Yeah, it's nice to use that professionally.
Great.
And some further links. Actually, you should have included the link to Werken voor Nederland. Maybe can do that later.
Yeah. Well, then our final question is what do you think your job will look like in 10 years? Because of course climate policies change, and what do you think as a researcher that will mean for you?
10 years, then we're in 2030. Well, I will heavily try to analyze whether whether countries have actually met their targets, and then maybe more in the form of project leader, I hope. For me personally, but I'm afraid we'll still be working on climate policy and Paris Agreement implementation and making the transition. I don't think it will be done in 10 years, so we'll still be very relevant to see where we are, and especially shift focus to analyzing how can countries actually start doing this. We're already going into that direction, so really more practical advice of how do you make that transition, and then it will be even more relevant, because that's the point where our scenarios say you have to go down rapidly in emissions. So I assume we'll have a lot to do then. And then maybe also a bit more focus on the interlinkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much for all your information. Thanks a lot to all the people who sent in their questions. So this was the talk from Helene about PBL, and we'll start at 2 again with the ROC group. So we'll have a small break, and I hope to see you back again.
Thanks for inviting me, and I hope you found it
Thank you so much.